What's up, guys? It's Eventon here. So, just as a heads up, again, as the title suggests, I'm just covering light and medium drones. This is mainly because the majority of the ships in the game are going to be using that can actually use drones are going to be using light, medium, or heavy drones 95% of the time. So I'm not going to be covering, sentry drones, ECM drones, fighters, whatever it is. And so right now I'm showing the Dominics, which this ship uses mostly heavy drones, but it can use sentry drones. But again, that's only for like pretty niche fits, things like that. But the majority of drones that are traded, bought, sold, destroyed in the game and used in PvP and PvE are going to be like the light, medium, and heavy ones. So I mainly wanted to do this because I was a noob, even like less than a year ago. So I was very confused with the different drones, the damage types they did. What's the difference between augmented, integrated, and the faction drones? So in this video, we're just going to be focusing on like the raw stats and just painting a very clear picture of the kind of the trade-offs between certain drones, damage types, and things like that. Because I don't want to touch too much into like ship bonuses, skills that could help with certain things. We might touch on skills very, very briefly at the end, but for the most part, we're just going to be looking at the raw stats of the drones and kind of understanding where the trade-offs are and why people might recommend certain drones over others. So again, honestly, you could read all of this stuff online at like wiki.university/drones or something like that. So like the Eve Wiki, but it's honestly a lot of heavy reading, and it's just bricks and bricks and bricks of just text, and it's going to take you a while to read through it. So hopefully this video can clear some things up. And I'm not the most experienced person when it comes to drones, but I think I understand enough to paint a clear enough picture. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. Okay, so hopefully I can make it clear for you guys. To be honest, I didn't really mock up a script or anything like that, because I do have to explain the differences between the drones of the 4 different empires and kind of like the goods and bads of each one. But more importantly, also talk about the different types of drones within each empire. So like, the integrated, augmented, and faction hobgoblins, what's the difference between all of those? So looking at these, so the hobgoblin is the Galente, the hornet is the Caldari, the acolyte is the Amar, and the warrior one is the Minotaur. You can actually kind of tell by like the background of the drone, because it looks like they're flying around like in their actual respective empire space. So some of the differences that you'll notice just here across the board, honestly, this isn't even like the most important part, to be honest. It's going to be a little bit further down, but you'll see that the distribution of hit points is a bit different. All of the resists are in the shields and the armor. There's actually no resist when it comes to the structure, so sometimes your drones can get melted relatively quickly. As you can see, Amar has the highest in armor, but the Caldari has the highest in shields when it comes to all of them. And this, if anything, actually makes the Caldari like the tankiest drone. But again, I don't think that's the biggest deal. I don't think people are picking drones because they're the tankiest. It's mainly because of these reasons. Here, I'm going to scroll all of these down towards the bottom, because this is honestly the main reason why people are picking certain drones. So if you look down here, all the drones do the exact same amount of damage, but there's just different types. So this does 20 HP, this does 20, and this is based on my drone skills. So if this number is a bit higher or lower, that's why. But the main thing you'll notice here is that the damage modifier. So the damage modifier on this is 1.6, that's 1.5, that's 1.4, that's 1.3. So actually set it up this way where the damage actually goes from left to right. But as you'll notice, there's a big trade-off. So as this gets more damage, it's going to be hurt in the tracking and I believe it's not the orbit velocity, but just the maximum velocity in general. So you'll notice that even though the hobgoblin can push the most damage because it's a 1.6 modifier versus the others, it's only traveling at 2,800 meters a second, and its tracking speed. As this number goes up, the tracking improves. As you can see, it says higher values improve accuracy against small and fast targets. So you notice that the tracking actually gets higher. So this actually makes warriors do the least amount of damage, but they are the fastest drones as well as have the best tracking. Now, there are certain things that you kind of want to be mindful of. If your drones are actually moving too fast, there are certain modules you can add to your ship that can make your drones move faster. There is a certain point where your drones are actually moving so fast and kind of almost like slingshotting themselves like around certain targets that it's actually making them harder for them to track, but I wouldn't worry about that too much. Again, we're just looking at the raw stats here. So again, you can just see it's a sliding scale. As the damage goes up, the movement speed, or like the fly speed, and the tracking goes down as well. There are a few other very, very minor differences like optimal range and the distance it orbits at, but honestly, those things are very, very minimal. And this is actually why everyone recommends the hobgoblins when it comes to PvE. And if it comes to PvP, I guess it just depends on like the types of ships or the space that you're in that you typically run into. But hobgoblins is usually recommended. I mean, if you're doing missions, always use the type of drone that you're going to be up against when it comes to like missions and stuff. But most people recommend the hobgoblins because the majority of the pirate factions are actually weak against thermal. It's either like their primary or their secondary resist hull for the most part. So even if thermal was like the second resist hull, like it's not the best one, but it's the second best one, because of that 1.6 damage modifier, it pretty much breaks even. And I believe it's the majority of the pirate factions are weak to thermal. So if you have hobgoblins, more often than not, you're going to be fine. And this is actually what's going to make this video pretty easy, because this is pretty much the exact same story as the medium drones. As the damage goes up, the tracking and the movement speed goes down. So we'll go ahead and pull those up right now. Okay, now we're looking at the medium drones, and it's pretty much the same story, guys. I put them in order from left to right as it pertains to damage. So the Galente, Caldari, Amar, and Minmatar. The effective hit point totals of the drones are kind of spread out, but again, Caldari is the tankiest just because it seems to have the most HP and shield and armor, which is the only place that drones have resistances at. And if you scroll down, we'll work our way from bottom to top. Again, the damage is the same, just different types, but the Galente has the 1.6, this is 1.5, 1.4, 1.3. The maximum velocity is going up and up and up. And the turret tracking, and again, remember, the higher the number, the better the tracking. So again, it's all a trade-off. The higher the damage goes, the slower you move, and the harder it is to track. There are certain modules to boost these up, so sometimes there are modules you can add to make it easier for your hammerheads to hit smaller targets. And also, as it pertains to the damage modifier, the 1.6 versus the 1.5, it doesn't seem like a lot of damage, but when you're hitting certain resist holes, it definitely makes a big difference. And even if you fly certain ships that give drone damage bonuses, that number gets exponentially bigger. And especially if you times it by 5 drones, now you're just getting even more damage. So even though it might seem like, oh, well, the only difference between this is 0.1 or 0.2, whatever it is, the damage does add up, especially if you're flying all 5 drones up in the air and like the ship can actually handle the bandwidth. So we'll go ahead and cover the heavy drones. Like I said, it's going to be the same story, but we'll take a look at them anyway. All right, and here we are again with the heavy drones. Again, Galente, Caldari, Amar, and Minmatar. I actually like the look of the ogres just look like straight up mechs. This one looks like it's some sort of like repair drone, like from like Star Wars or something like that. But I do like the look of these two. These ones actually look like they could be ships themselves, but they're just very, very large drones. Again, same story. The hit points are just divided up in different spots. It seems like Caldari is the tankiest for the most part because of those resists. We'll scroll down to the bottom. And as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. And again, we're just looking at the T1 versions of all of these, but there's the 1.6 all the way down to 1.3. Maximum velocity is at its lowest tier, scaling all the way up to the Berserkers. And then the turret tracking is really, really low, but it does get better as it goes up as well. So again, I mean, I hope this makes it pretty much clear. The Galente, they've always been known as the faction to make the most use of drones, which is why they probably do the most damage. Most people recommend it for PvE just because typically, I would say tracking issues aren't the biggest issue with PvE, but with PvP, people are very good at maneuvering and navigating and kiting and even focusing down your drones. So sometimes having slightly faster drones is a bit better versus always having the heaviest and hardest hitting ones. But when it comes to PvE, that's not always the case. There's a lot of workarounds in that aspect. So we'll go ahead and look at the differences between the drones, because there are a lot of faction differences and the format's going to be looking up a little bit different. So hopefully I can make it pretty clear for you guys. Okay, and now we're going to be looking at the differences between the drones themselves, I guess within that drone family, whatever you want to call it. So we're looking at the tier 1, the faction drones, the tier 2. And if you guys want to open up the compare tool like this, you just open up the info of any drone, go to variations, and then click on compare, and it should pull this up. Just make sure that in the top left of this compare tool, click on the only show attributes that differ. If you don't, it's going to just show you a bunch of statistics that doesn't really matter because it's not showing you the difference. It's the same across all of them. So We're going to go over, I know it's a lot of numbers here, but I'll explain the differences and the kind of the give and take between all of these different drone types. Also on the right side, hopefully I'll put up, if I'm not lazy with the editing, I'll put up 2 different images of kind of more of just visuals that are going to explain a bit more in depth as to what I'm getting at here. So the nice thing is, so the Ogre ones, integrated ogres and Federation Navy ogres, or just like the integrated and the faction versions, if you can use ogre ones, you can use these as well. So you're not going to be gated by skills, but you are going to be gated by skills when it comes to using the T2 or the augmented ogres. So you will actually have to have, so for the ogres, you will actually have to have Galente drone specialization skilled up to at least 1 in order to use these tier 2 versions. And the main reason for that is because these 2 versions are actually really good. I organized them by damage type, so as you can see, the augmented ogres are worth way more than the other versions. So this is worth basically 26 million, but it has the highest hit points, the second best in tracking, it's the fastest in velocity, highest damage type, or the damage modifier, but it uses 2 different types of damage. So this is something that the integrated ogre and the augmented ogre use. So all of the drones, all of the ogres use thermal damage, but occasionally it will use this second type of damage, which is kinetic. Something I did forget to mention before is that typically the drones in that part of space, so this is the Galente drones, these are actually really good against the pirates in that region, which I believe in that region is Serpentis. So they are weak to kinetic and thermal, so these drones are going to work very well against them. It's going to really depend. Sometimes hitting that hole directly, thermal is going to be the best, but more often than not, if you just want to hit like a battleship, like these are usually, augmented drones are usually used for hitting very large ships as hard as possible in that resist hole. So now that we got the augmented drone down, the Federation Navy drone compared to the others, you'll notice that this drone actually has a lot of hit points. It has really good tracking. It actually has the best tracking of all of them. Decent speed, damage modifier, and all that stuff. You'll notice it's really similar to the tier 2 version of the Ogre. It has more health, slightly better tracking. It's even worth a bit more, but you'll notice that a lot of the times people always seem to just use Ogre 2s all the time. And the reason for that is, and it's not highlighted here, is because, again, we're going to go back to that Galente drone specialization, is that if you get this up to like 10%, all of your drones are doing 10% more damage, at least just the Ogre 2s and the augmented ogres. Because this isn't technically a Galente drone, I guess you could say, they're technically like faction drones, they're not benefiting from this bonus. So even though it shows that they're doing the exact same amount of damage of 64 and the damage modifier is like 1.92, the Ogre 2s are actually pushing more damage. And it might not seem a lot, 10%, but if, again, you times that by 5 drones, or if you're using a ship that is increasing the damage of your drones, that exponentially gets higher and higher compared to the Federation Navy. The integrated ogres honestly seem to be kind of like a, I would say like a poor man's version of an augmented ogre. Again, that image on the right side just definitely paints a better picture. Like you're getting pretty much like a 10% increase across the board compared to the ogre ones. But if you can afford it, just go for the Federation Navy ogres. They're pretty much strictly better across the board, only for a little bit more ISK. Like if you're going to be investing basically 1 million ISK per integrated ogre, you might as well just invest the 2 million, because these are just kind of strictly better across the board for the most part. So again, if you basically want the best tracking and a lot of HP, but you don't have the skills for the Ogre 2s and like the augmented ogres, I would just stock up on the Federation Navy versions, because the extra HP and the tracking is going to be really nice. But the second you can get up to tier 2 or the augmented ogres, I'd recommend the Ogre 2s. These are just very, very price efficient ways of pushing the most damage possible. But if you have the ISK to spend, or you feel very, very comfortable using your ship or the type of content that you're doing, and you just want to push out as much damage as possible, like you're blitzing missions or certain Abyss content, people are really good at it, and so they just use the augmented versions to down those battleships as fast as possible. I would definitely recommend the augmented ogres, because those push, again, the most damage possible. And I feel like I would be a bit remiss too to not bring up these kind of specialty drones, since they do fall under the category of like light, medium, and heavy. I'll cover the Gecko first because it seems to be the most popular and like well-known one in the game. So the Gecko is really interesting because it's basically, it takes up twice the size of a heavy drone. So a heavy drone is 25 megabits a second. This one's 50. And it also does something called omni damage, which it does an equal amount of damage across all the different types. So remember, the heavy drones were doing 64 damage. So because it's basically the size of two heavies, it's doing 64 in like the EM and thermal, and then it's also doing 64 in the kinetic and explosive. It also has a pretty high damage modifier as well. It's very, very tanky. It has a lot of HP. To be honest, these kind of items are more of like a novelty thing. You're much better off just hitting the resist hole of whatever ship that you're going after instead of just doing an equal amount of damage across the board, because I think you're actually going to be able to push more damage using just two heavy drones with specific damage types than just trying to do an equal amount of damage across the board. And the same thing here for this subverted JVN UC49. I just did a bit of research, and it seems to be a giveaway for like an event back in 2018 of September. It was like the Rogue Drone or like the Rogue Swarm like update or something like that. So they were giving away like blueprint copies and that kind of stuff. So this seems to be like a Rogue Drone thing that was kind of like captured, or we were able to make it. And it's a very similar story. So these actually do actually same amount of damage, but it has a reduced damage modifier. So because this is a medium drone. So this is kind of just like a very smaller version of the Gecko. And of course, I mean, the drones are just very, very expensive. I meant to actually check to see how much this thing is worth, at least right now in the market. Yeah, it's worth almost 100 million. And this one's worth, yeah, about 100 million as well. So these are pretty much just novelty drones. I would not suggest investing in these at all unless you have the IS to blow, or you have like really, really high drone skills and you feel safe using these. But for the most part, you're honestly just better off using normal drones with specific damage types. And that's pretty much it, guys. I hope all of you guys learned something new. If not, I hope it was a nice refresher for some of you long-term veterans. I think the biggest takeaway here was I think everyone understands, for the most part, the damage types, but I think the biggest thing is kind of understanding the give and take of the different drone types. So like the integrated, the augmented, the faction drones, the T2, the T1s. I think understanding the differences between like the tracking, the HP, and like the damage output is definitely a big deal. So you kind of, just like an Eve, in any aspect of the game, you kind of have to have the right tools for the job. So again, if you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns, put them down in the comments below. I love the interaction and kind of the subscribers we've been getting so far and the amount of activity that's happening down in the comments. So I'd love to continue that. And let me know what kind of drones you guys like using. What are your favorite type of drones to use? What's your favorite faction? Maybe which ones are your favorite to look at when they're out being used? And then we'll go from there. So hope you guys take care and fly safe.